It's helped me distinguish too, like what I want the low end to be coming from, as in the subs. These days I kind of make a decision, like, is it going to be the kick or is it going to be the bass? And I kind of pick between the two. And that's just in studying a lot of bass music too. It seems to be just like a song's either one or the other, you know, sustained subs or just like a really punchy sub coming from the kick.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. This episode is sponsored by OWC, Other World Computing, which you can find at OWC.com. Your trusted source for memory and speed upgrades, DIY installs, and used Macs for your studio. Let OWC focus on keeping your studio Mac in killer condition so that you can focus on making great music. Why ditch your existing Mac when you can take your studio far into the future with OWC? Learn more at OWC.com and learn how you can supercharge your studio Mac. The speed to create, the capacity to dream. Find out how awesome your Mac can be at OWC. This show is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can go to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level. And you can start right now with my free Introduction to Mixing course, Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is that these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you are in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, or look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the recording studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Spencer Bastian, a Michigan-born and Los Angeles-based producer. Starting out as a musician, Spencer played with Jason Evigan's band After Midnight Project, and their first single, Take Me Home, peaked at number 25 on the alternative rock radio in 2009. Then Spencer went on to tour for the 2009-2010 Vans Warped Tour, opening for bands like Chevelle, Papa Roach, and The Used. And toward the end of those tours, Bastian's passion for electronic music grew. In 2014, he founded the live electronic band Citizun, who performed at festivals like Bass Camp Festival and Summer Camp Festival. It was his time with Citizun that began his segue into producing, and Bastian went on to help the band develop a fresh electronic sound for their two EPs, Blood Love and Lay Low, and their single Echo. Since then, he's worked with a variety of artists, including Chromeo, DRAM, Demi Lovato, Bea Miller, Rachel Platten, Jason Derulo, and Bridgit Mendler, and has exciting and notable projects in the works for 2019 and beyond. I met Spencer through a recent guest on the podcast, singer Jonathan Gersitano, for whom Spencer has been producing great electronic pop mixes. So I'm psyched to dig into some great songwriting, production, and some awesome EDM mixing tricks today. Please welcome Spencer Bastian to Recording Studio Rockstars. Spencer, are you ready to rock, dude?
Indeed. Thank you, Lid, for having me.
Dude, glad to have you here. So glad you could join us on the show. I know we struggled with a little bit of Skype issues and getting the sound right. So Rockstars, thanks for your patience as we're working through, like an iPhone mic, but I think it'll be great because it's not going to stop us from talking about making great records.
Indeed. The irony,
The irony indeed. That's one of the things I discovered on the podcast that's so funny about doing this with professional recording engineers and producers is we are the last dudes to have a USB mic sitting around a studio to plug into Skype,
Every day in music is a new learning lesson. So this is the takeaway today. And now I know one thing that I need. So
that's awesome, man. Tell us about your studio. How'd you get into recording and what's your studio like these days in LA?
Well, I got into recording, many moons ago and always kind of dabbled with it in college. But in before, but when I moved to LA to join the band with Jason, I really made a conscious decision. It's either recording or guitar playing, and I focused on my, guitar abilities for a little bit. But it was kind of in the midst of the band experience that I became, obsessed with production. It was on our second album specifically. So at that point, I was actually living with Jason and kind of, in a way, not really sharing, but using his studio that he had at home. And he had just all kinds of toys and microphones and preamps and everything. So that was kind of my first exposure to really, hands-on use with everything. And there was always an emphasis there on just not really following any rules per se. So it was probably a good school to come from, I would say, because there was just literally just plug whatever into whatever and see what happens. And yeah, that would be kind of what got me into it. And
so this is you're like really guitar focused at this point and focused on performing in a band and all that. What about the style of music? Before you got into the more stuff you're doing now, if you're playing on the Vans Warped Tour, I'm picturing like, like skater punk and stuff.
Oh, 100%. That was, at that time, it was, how do you get the biggest guitar sound, which I definitely never accomplished.
Yeah, how do you get the biggest guitar sound?
I don't know. Now if you were to ask me, I would say I'd combine it with, layers of synths and other things and other sound design tricks. And
we'll be asking that question again here shortly.
But yeah, back then it was just, combining different heads and Hughes and Kettners and, dual rectifiers and whatever we could get our hands on and every mic imaginable and just trying and failing to, until we got a sound we liked. And actually a lot of the guitars on the second album, at least, were just direct in the end. We'd spend time recording cabs and then end up just doing stuff in the box anyway, but or layering the two.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's funny how like we know about direct bass sometimes winning out over amped guitars, but we don't hear a lot of stories about direct guitars winning out over amped guitars.
Well, I think that goes back to just the no rules thing where because I agree, there's usually not a lot of a body with, direct guitar. But when you start experimenting with plugins almost aimlessly and things you would not normally throw on guitars, you start getting really wacky sounds. And then all of a sudden it just turns into more of a sound design adventure than just like how to track a guitar properly.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, you're right. Stylistically, it was all just, rock, hard rock and alt rock back then. And while on tour, Jason showed me Skrillex and, that changed everything.
Yeah, watch out.
Probably changed everything for, a million other guys the same exact summer. So, when we got off that tour, it was like, okay, how do you make those sounds? And then that, led me to temporarily put my guitar down for a little while and try to figure out, what's going on and, what is Ableton? What is, what is an LFO?
Nice.
And here we are.
So interesting, starting out with dubstep and Skrillex. I've been going to Bonnaroo, the festival here, this is going to be my 15th year. I think this year is my 15th year. And it's been that long. And I've seen a lot of shows. And one of my favorite live shows, ironically, was Skrillex when he came and played at Bonnaroo. I'm sure it's because I enjoy dubstep. That probably helped a lot. But it was just fun and something about that. It's such a great crowd energy lifter, getting everybody psyched up. Were you interested in EDM before Skrillex came along, or was that like your introduction?
No.
Just happened to be that was the genre at the time, you think?
I think I was definitely the guy who actually, not only was I not into it, but I thought it was lame. I didn't understand it. And I thought the best music was, a live band, and, it was pure rock all the way. DJs have no talent, blah, blah, blah. And I was very ignorant. And, I guess when I first heard, dubstep and similar styles to that, it just brought me back to high school and metal, because I was a huge metalhead, death metal and black metal. And this just had this kind of energy about it, where you could mosh to it. And that was instantly the appeal, just like pure adrenaline. So,
well, that's interesting. You made that comment, like that sort of, that you've heard before, this DJs don't have any talent. They just press a button.
Yeah.
But I think what's funny about it is people not realizing that all the performance and the work and effort went in before the stage, and that's why you can hit a button and play it back at that point. And it does bring up, I'll just jump right forward to this one question that I'd written down, because I think it was Deadmau5 that I heard made a quote once where he talked about, like, the only way you can really you can do live EDM, but you're stuck with certain limitations. And the only way you can do really, really good live EDM is if it's pre-recorded, because there's so many things that need to happen. So what are your thoughts on that concept, at the risk of getting deep into the topic already?
As far as, just like producing it beforehand and then performing it, like a quote unquote performing it. Yeah.
Well, and it's a loaded question, because I know you're doing really cool stuff with the band on stage, doing electronic. So what is it?
I think, I even when I started Citizun, because, that was our whole angle, was we were performing a lot of it live, even though it was similar style to a lot of the stuff that's made in the studio. And then, just, hit play or whatever, like a lot of the DJs, or at least I thought they were doing. So I think that I guess at first I thought that was still pretty lame, but then I started realizing there's so much else that goes into a performance by a lot of, the big DJs, even if they aren't necessarily like, hitting pads or doing anything live. Like, there's not only the production, but also just the actual song selection and the set flow, which I guess that's really probably what opened up my eyes the most about the scene in general, is just that these guys are like musicologists, within their own genre or scene. Like, and I'd be hanging out with Kill the Noise or something and realize that these dudes are like total music experts.
Dude, you're bringing up all my favorites, man.
We opened for him a few times and at a few different festivals, and, got to talk shop and man, like Jake, he's like all these guys, they're just experts. They're so passionate. So that's when all that went away, the feeling of it requiring less ability to, go up there and just, kind of, I don't know. I guess it's hit play, but it's not really even that either. There's still guys like flipping taking a song out and adding another one on the spot. And it's pretty intimidating, really. Like, imagine if you're playing in a band and then all of a sudden the singer's like, no, we're not going to play that one that we rehearsed and we were supposed to play right there, and then throw in another one. I guess bands do that all the time, but, not really in the circuit that my band was. Like, we had a set list that was dialed in and it had production around it. And, you couldn't really just swap a song in and out that easily. So,
well, that's a trip, man. So, all right, well, let me back up a little bit before we get too far rolling. And I like to ask guests to share an inspirational quote to kind of kick off the podcast. We got lots of fun stuff to talk about. And I love that we're going to be talking about, making heavy rock music and making EDM tracks too. But have you got anything you want to kick off the podcast with? Anybody that sort of inspired you for hitting the studio?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's really a quote, but it's just a saying that I use all the time, and I don't know where I picked it up, but it's think less, do more.
Nice.
And That's probably, maybe that's common, maybe it's not, I don't know, but that seems to be my mantra these days, is just go in, especially, I mean, in all things in life for sure, but in music especially, just, if you're, there's just being stuck is like a waste of time. So just start doing things, like stay active and let your creativity just flow naturally.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that makes me think of stuff that happens when you kind of force yourself to move forward, whether it's a live performance thing or whether you're jamming with the band and you just start making up lyrics on a mic. You kind of,
Exactly.
you get out of your own way. Like things can happen that surprise you when you let yourself do that.
Yeah. And I encourage everyone I work with to do the exact same thing, whether it's my bandmates or my friend who shares the studio with me. It's just, or an artist that we're recording, just like, let's just go for it and see what happens. It's always more fun that way.
Well, so one of the questions I would have for you in the EDM world, there's a real balancing act between, if I sit down with Logic for a minute, it's like, okay, I'll drag this in, put it there, place these 4 things. They're going to happen from here. I want to filter. Okay, better pull open the automation and draw a line from here to here. And it feels very premeditated sometimes, which is that's like think more, do less probably, unless you're really, really fast at the programming aspect of it. How do you balance that kind of approach to EDM versus something that feels more like a performance that happened one time and you just captured it?
Well, one thing I would point out immediately is that I started using Ableton's hardware Push 2, and that alone allows you to, like, for automation, for example. I mean, I still draw in curves, but I would say 75% of the time I'm turning a knob or turning a variety of knobs at the same time that are all controlling whatever plugin I have it, push set to control. So it's still got a more hands-on, or it allows me to have a more hands-on approach to that. And it doesn't feel robotic, and you get unexpected happy accidents. Mm-hmm. So, that combined with just, I guess I use the think less approach all around, like throwing in random samples, like, okay, we need a snare drum now. Like, I won't necessarily even go through a snares folder. It's just go through like a vocal folder, or what did I sample? I keep, these sample libraries from vinyl or from CDs. So I'll just start randomly going through those and, build a snare out of, something I recorded myself with my portable digital recorder, and then like a vocal sample, and then like an impact from some old Vengeance library, whatever. Like,
yeah,
it's literally throwing stuff together so fast and not thinking about it at all. And then just, like the next day cleaning it up, and you're probably deleting like, 80% of what I did. But then in the cleanup process, it's like, oh, okay, there's something really cool here.
Yeah, that's almost the right time to think more, do less.
Exactly. That's when you completely switch gears. And
the editing stage.
Yeah, which is fun. But then, and I like the editing stage too. It's the stage after that I don't like, which is mixing stage.
All right, cool. Well, let's talk about the editing stage for a sec. Do you grapple? So you like throw a bunch of ideas out there, and then you got to come back later and sort through it and listen and delete a bunch of things, right? Yeah. Is there, do you have to fight against a desire to try and keep many of those things in there? Or is because you're going so quickly, is it easy to just delete stuff and get rid of it and not worry about it?
It used to be very difficult. So if you listen to stuff I was doing when I first started, maybe 6 years ago, there's like 10 different melodies in one song. And there's even some points of the song where there's like, like 10 different synths playing different things. And it's like, and I was like, thought that I was a badass and I'm like showing off here. And it took me a while to realize that, the whole less is more thing. And everyone was telling me it constantly, like, take a more minimal approach. And I thought they were full of shit. And can I swear on here?
Yeah,
Sorry.
totally, man. Swear away. Fuck it. Say what you want.
Cool. And anyway, finally it actually clicked. So now it's a little easier for me to just kind of pick the best parts. And I have a method about that too, where I'll solo just one track and, loop like, let's say a 4-bar segment, and then add in, and then I'll like, add, I guess not really, I'm trying to explain how like unmute another track. So now there'll be 2 playing at once. And then you're like, oh, okay, the kick actually playing the wrong pattern here with the bass, and start adjusting things like very slowly and methodically. And when I do it like that and start opening it up very, very slowly, I quickly realize like, okay, that string thing, doesn't work with the synth thing that I was just listening to. And then I'll just pick the one I like better.
I see. Whereas if you just like, if you have it all going at once, you're like, yeah. I think it's kind of cool.
That's like, that's kind of just a new approach I'm taking in general, where I go literally beat by beat of the song, and I'm looking up and down the Ableton or Pro Tools session, depending on what I'm working in, and just making sure there's only a few things happening at any given beat. And that's like been game changing for me, actually.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Tell us about your studio in LA. What's it like? Is it just you and a laptop? Are you like Skrillex, like smashing a laptop, like Pete Townsend smashing a guitar on stage? Or?
Not at all, actually. I share a studio with my friend Misha Chilak, who goes by Book, and we have a room in Burbank, and it's in a hallway of like above this chiropractor's office. It's totally random, but there's a lot of studios in there, and some pretty notable artists share rooms in there as well. And
you guys calling yourself Backbreaking Beats?
That's pretty good, man.
You can have it, man. You can have it.
Really? All right. You're onto something there. I like that. Because we both have back issues too. So despite a decent chair.
No, it's because you guys are carrying such a heavy groove for so long.
Oh man, dude. You're full. You got these down. We have just a small room with actually the mic booth is as big as the main room. And it's I don't know, probably like 10 by 10 each room. And it's hard to explain. I got to show it. I got to send you a picture.
So it's like kind of a square shape each room?
Yes. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Are you aware of the acoustical challenges of a square shaped control room?
Yes.
Awesome.
So we spent a good amount of time, getting the, everything set up to where the music's listenable in there. We don't even have bass traps, but because there's like a couch in the back, and we've gotten around it with just the amount of stuff that's in there, and it's actually pretty good at this point. And we've got I'm trying to think of like the main pieces of gear. The mic is Upton 251, and that runs into a Silver Bullet. Are you familiar with the Silver Bullet? It's made by Louder Than Liftoff.
Oh, cool.
And it's an awesome piece of gear. So it kind of models after just like a Neve or an API preamp. You can switch between the two or combine the two. It's got a lot of color. Anyway, those are the two main pieces, and then they run into our patch bay, and then we've got amps and other mics and tons of pedals, and the way that I think the best part about our setup is the patch bay, and that we can run stems out of Ableton into my amp, and then even from the amp back into a pedal and then into whatever else. It's like, I guess it's like any other studio, but we just seem to use it in what I think are weird ways, but maybe they're not.
There's only ways to count, right?
Exactly.
What are some tricks that you have discovered as far as getting it out of the computer down to guitar level and then back into the computer again. Are there any special pedals or boxes you got to use for that kind of stuff?
Not really. I mean, there probably should be doing that, but I'm kind of just like seeing what happens all the time and just, kind of monitoring and trying to be conscious of the gain staging as much as I can be. But
so
yeah.
how do you, so if you're going to run it out of out of a Pro Tools session or Ableton and then down to go through a guitar pedal, do you have to turn the level way, way, way down or something like that? And what sort of cable gets you from one place to another?
I'm just using just the patch cables, and then within the software for my interface, being conscious of where the level's at. So I can, it's easy to look at those. I use a Roland interface, and I just kind of watch the levels there and just make sure nothing looks too crazy. But no special cables, and I'm not an expert with, impedances or just levels in general. I just kind of mess around until it sounds decent.
Well, I guess in my experience, sometimes I've found that the level that a guitar is or a voice is pretty good if it's in my mix is, Pro Tools fader up to here. But if I'm running it out through some piece of gear and it's like guitar level, I have to turn that fader down like -20 or something to get it more in the ballpark. And but it sounds like you just kind of push it around until it starts working, and it doesn't really matter. You don't have to think about it too hard. If it sounds crazy distorted, you just turn it down and see if it sounds better.
Exactly. Yeah. So
cool.
But yeah, so our room's pretty simple though. I'm just sitting in front of push 2 and surrounded by, pedals and a patch bay. So
now, so you're using Ableton Live. Are you also using Pro Tools, or are you like from one to the other? Is that a work process, or are you just staying in Ableton for, recording all the way through mix?
I try to do vocals and any in-depth instrument recording in Pro Tools, just because of the playlisting, really. And I started on Pro Tools, so I'm really familiar with it. And I was producing exclusively in Pro Tools for a while, and then discovered Ableton through Citizun because we were using it for our live setup, and quickly became obsessed with producing within Ableton. So now, yeah, Pro Tools is just for tracking vocals and maybe guitar, and Ableton is for everything else. So I do finish in Ableton.
Cool. I love Ableton Live. It's super fun. I'm not using it enough. I sort of went through a phase, and I don't have a copy of it now. So that would I might have a light copy of it, but I'd love to use it more. How would you describe Ableton to somebody who hasn't really messed around with it yet? And they're like, why should I go check that out?
I think, I guess I would describe it just as I use it more like a traditional DAW, which is actually kind of shocking to a lot of my friends because they use like the whole like loop based, I think it's called session view.
Yes, session view clips.
Yeah. And I actually, one of the few, I guess, that just doesn't really use that. I don't even really fully understand. I kind of want to get more into that because it seems really fun. But I just use it with the same in arrangement view, the same way as Pro Tools. But what the selling point for me are things like the hardware, such as push, or I even have a couple Novation controllers too, where, like I said earlier, you get that hands-on approach to controlling a specific plugin. So I don't know if you can do that in Pro Tools. I'm sure you can, MIDI map something, but it's just you with these Novation controllers and push, you just plug it in and then all of a sudden you don't really need to look at the screen to control your EQ, for example, or your phaser. So that's a huge selling point, and recording automation is super easy, and you can just get really wild with it. Like I run these envelope followers or LFOs that control different parameters of plugins, and you can just like the sound design capabilities are just limitless, and if you're willing to go down that rabbit hole with how much can you automate.
Now I know as far as automation goes, I seem to remember that you can just press record up on the transport, even if no tracks are record enabled, and it will just record every move you do. So if you're just jamming out, tweaking sounds and effects, and none of it was getting recorded onto a track, it would record all those mix moves. So you are capturing all those moments if you want to, right?
Yeah. And that goes for third-party plugins too. So yeah, that's a huge selling point. And then, I mean, probably the biggest one that, the reason I even got into it was just the browser window and how you can, while you're playing your song back, you can, easily browse through samples and you're like, oh, that would sound really cool there, and just quickly drop it onto the timeline. And also it plays your loops in time. You can make loops really easily. And I mean, at this point, like, for example, I've found and sourced just probably like 5,000 drum breaks, for example. And and I've manually, over the course of a couple of years, like warped them all in Ableton. So now, I have like thousands and thousands of drum breaks and all these different styles that I can just like play back while I'm playing my song for fills and other things. That's just one of many examples of something I don't think I could do in any other DAW.
Yeah, I think I don't remember which track it was. Maybe it was with one of the female artists, where you dropped in kind of like a dead tom, like do 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 kind of break, and it just totally made me think of the Dust Brothers, old school, but you were doing it with kind of a new school sound,
Yeah, and that was probably some happy accident. So, yeah, so it definitely falls in line with the whole, think less, do more approach.
Yeah. Are you also a fan of Beck and that kind of production?
Oh yeah. Especially now. I think so Citizun took a 2-year break, and because we were all focused on other things, and we just started ramping things back up a couple months ago, and somehow we went from like a live trap EDM band to like a psychedelic rock band now.
Cool.
And so we're definitely referencing Beck. Beck's one of many bands that we've been jamming out to lately. And now we're like fully live, and it's a pretty complex setup too, with everything MIDI synced. And
well, I saw him perform here in Nashville last spring. And his new record, the material was just so cool, seeing the combination of programmed stuff and the live band playing it on stage.
Yeah, his show is insane.
It was cool. It was really fun. He just looked like he was just goofing around up there the whole time too.
I think he's just always had that vibe too, which is just incredible. It's so inspiring.
Yeah. Dig it. Speaking of other folks, tell us the story of working with Chromeo.
So that was an interesting one. I didn't actually write the song. The song was sent to me in very demo form. I think it was Jason Evigan and Amar Malik and J Cash and maybe Lunch Money, I feel like, was on it. But Jason sent me just the bare bones version of the song, which was, I don't even think the reverses or anything. It was just the chorus and maybe like a snap or like a clap in the background. I don't even know if there were chords or anything there. And so I was the first.
That was me clapping in the background.
Nice. That's basically what it sounded like. And then just Must Have Been High, like chorus. So I was actually the first producer to touch that song way before Chromeo had even heard it. And I kind of got a beat going and kind of, started just building an arrangement around it. And okay, maybe it should be 4 on the floor, and maybe this should do kind of like almost like a drop. So I had a drop for it. And then I met up with my buddy Isaiah Tejada, who's a phenomenal producer out here. And together we kind of fleshed out the demo, and we wrote the melody for the post-chorus. And again, we didn't have anybody in mind or anything, and we just sent it back to Jason. And then I guess it was like, next thing you know, Chromeo was cutting the song. So then we worked with them really only on just some instrumentation stuff, but they kind of took it home after we got the demo over to them.
Dig it.
So,
I know they came down and played Bonnaroo a few years ago. For the rock stars who don't know, who is Chromeo and why should they be checking them out?
I've been a fan for a long time, and they're like, I don't even know how you describe their aesthetic, because it has these like retro, fun, kind of almost like 80s vibes. Like, I don't know if you want to say like Hall and Oates or just, it's not.
Yeah, I think they played with Daryl Hall or something at Bonnaroo.
I think they did. Yeah. So they're just like, they're super fun, and the show's just fun. It's just, you lose yourself. It's not like, it's not contrived. It's like, it's just like silly, but just high energy, fun dance music. And they're just insanely talented. And I don't know how to describe them really.
That's good enough.
Just go see them.
All right, cool.
No one can watch them and not enjoy their set, in my opinion.
So let's go back to your studio for a sec. You've got this 10 by 10 room. You got a couch in there. It seems like you figured out the low end in a space that technically should be the most challenging for getting low end right. So what monitors do you use in your studio, and how do you go about getting the low end right, especially considering that you're making music that by definition should be telling us like, this is the biggest, baddest low end you could get in a pair of speakers these days,
Yeah, no, great question. We've got a few different sets of monitors. I primarily use the Event PS8s. They're pretty old at this point. I don't know if you're familiar with those, but I switch between those. Those are like the mains, and then the little Oratones. Mm-hmm. So, and then we have a JBL sub. I don't know the exact model of it, but so basically when you're on the mains, the Events and the sub, like that's when we really monitor the low end, and then the Oratones are kind of more for balance. So I spend a lot of time on smaller monitors. That was an aha moment for me, I think, maybe a year or two ago, was when I realized like it's not efficient or effective to mix and produce on, super loud volume all the time.
Right.
So I started trying to get things to hit harder on smaller monitors, and then I'll go back and forth because I'll get it hitting hard on smalls and then go to the mains, and it's like, oh wow, there's way too much bass. Like, so then I dial it from there and then go back and forth. But you really just have to keep going back and forth, don't you? Yeah, I even use these tiny PC speakers I picked up for $5 at a yard sale, and they're like, they say Amazon on them. They're like the most generic, like shitty crap speakers, and those are phenomenal for getting your balance right. Dig it. Yeah, and then Misha said he's going to get these Barefoots soon, so we'll see.
Oh man,
yeah,
the big ones with the subwoofer up on the side.
Yeah, exactly.
Those are monsters.
All right, cool, man. If you think those will help in here, then if the room's big enough for those, let's do it. But
question for you about the iPhone speaker. Do you find that like the speaker and playback off of your phone or an iPad or whatever is a relevant measure of whether your mix is right? I know it's a mixed topic for a lot of people. I
do, and I actually, it's part of my mix checklist. Is I use a plugin called Audrey.io, and that's AUDREIO, and it allows you to stream music to any iOS device plugged in through USB.
Oh, yeah.
So I can play like my Pro Tools session direct through my phone. It avoids the whole process of bouncing and then playing back and then making notes. I can just do it all in real time. So that's I highly recommend that plugin. I was actually looking for, just a little like a MacBook speaker or iPhone speaker I could just buy and just put it like some. I don't know if anyone's making those, but I think that's smart to take the speaker out of those and have it easily connectable through like a 1/8 inch, and just you can put that on your your desk right in front of you and just use that all the time as another.
Yeah, that'd be
speaker set.
interesting.
But
I know I've used some other things like Nicecast, and I'm using one now called Airfoil,
whoa,
which is similar to what you're doing, except that yours plays right out of the DAW, it sounds like, as a plugin, right? So that's pretty hip. What about delay? Does it have is it pretty quick to play on your speakers, or is there a big old delay?
There's a sizable latency it's totally manageable if you're just doing some, quick mix notes or something, but it's not something you can really do while you're still in production stage. If you need to play something in or anything like that, the latency is too big.
Yeah. Why don't we describe that a little further for the rock stars in case they're trying to picture how something like this works? So you've got your Pro Tools session open, you're doing a mix, and what?
And basically at the very end of your master bus chain, you'd put the Audrey IO, and as long as you are running the app on your phone or iPad and it's plugged in through USB, it should show up pretty much automatically. It's actually there's so many different features of that thing too, where you can send audio from your phone back into your DAW, and you can run plugins on your phone, through, what's it called? I forgot you mean
where you can have, it's audio unit plugins in iPhone world.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
You can process it and treat it on your phone?
Exactly. And you can do all kinds of stuff with that. I have this sampler on my iPad that I use all the time, just called Sampler, but without the E. It's probably one of the best samplers I've ever used. And, you could send audio from Pro Tools to the sampler, for example, and record audio in digitally that way versus using the mic on your iPad. So Audrey IO is well worth I think it's $20.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, dig it. And then once you're on your phone, you just open the Audrey plugin or app or whatever, and now you're hearing your Pro Tools session streaming directly to your phone.
It'll say Mac Mini or MacBook, whatever you're plugged into, it'll show, and you click on it, and boom, now you're streaming audio through your phone.
All right, so let's ask some of the tough questions about that. What should we be listening and looking for when we're listening to our mix on our phone? What's the stuff that you should expect to hear, and what's the stuff where you're like, dude, you're not going to hear that?
Well, first of all, am I right in that the iPhone is summing to mono? At least my phone, my old ass iPhone, I think it's a mono speaker. So that alone is, and maybe the new iPhone. I'm way behind.
I think my X is actually stereo.
I think it is.
If I look at a video, it's
clearly got a dinosaur phone over here, but it's actually really helpful in that sense, because the summing to mono thing was another aha moment a few years ago when I started mixing my own records, and that's just huge. So, if you're using a lot of, stereo widening tricks, as soon as you sum it to mono, it might get very undesirable results. So
right.
Yeah, that's a big thing. So you're so for me, at least with my old terrible phone, summing mono, you're kind of getting two great things at once, like a limited bandwidth or frequency spectrum, response, whatever, and mono. So you can check how your synths sound and how everything sounds.
So Rockstars, it's not that we're trying to make the record mono. It's just that a lot of people in a lot of places might only hear it in mono, and this gives you a chance to double check that your mix still sounds great when it is heard in mono, right?
Yeah, that was a big tip from Mixed by Ali. I don't know if you know him, but he did all the Kendrick Lamar stuff, and I worked with him on the Bridgit Mendler stuff a few years ago, and maybe 2 years ago, and he that was his big thing. And I think I saw some interviews with him too, and that's just something he was talking about a lot back then, is mixing in mono. And he actually almost exclusively mixes in mono until the very end. He was staying in mono the whole session we were there, pretty much.
That's wild.
Yeah.
I also recently discovered the mono mixing in the past few years, and I've really enjoyed it. It is super fun. Like mixing, I have an Avantone, which is like your Auratone, a mix cube, and it's so doable to just turn the volume down and just listen to this quiet little thing and make musical decisions. You could do that for hours and hours, as long as people aren't talking too loud in the studio.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I do. Same thing. Yeah, low volume and switch it to mono, and if you start finding the balance a lot easier that way, and panning and everything. You start realizing things that are cluttering up your mix. I think faster than if you're using wide monitors.
What about I feel like one of the first things you notice is that you can't hear something. So you might have thought you had reverb in the mix, and then you go put it on this little mono guy, and you're like, shit, I can't. That's not a cool, trippy effect. I don't even hear it.
Exactly. Yeah, and I have a new project called Jealous Girl, and it's pretty heavy bass music. And we released our first song in December called Champion, and it's very just like gritty synth driven. And there's, the main synth is like the loudest thing in the mix by far. And we were just about to deliver it to the distributor, and we were like, oh shit, we never did our mono check, which was shocking that we hadn't done it. And we put it in mono, and literally the synths just vanished.
Oh man.
Right. Well, so actually that was a good exercise in how to retain the energy in mono. And we found a few tools that we started using religiously after that experience. So,
what are those tools?
Well, one of them is, it's actually an audio effect rack in Ableton, and it's this producer called Bass Clef, Clef with a K, Bass Clef, and he releases these audio effect racks cheaply. Like I think they're like, I don't know, a few bucks each or something. And one of them was called Easy Stereo, and he just swears that it's mono compatible, and sure enough, it really is. So it doesn't sound quite as wide as, typical effects where the Haas effect, delaying or pitching one side, relative to the other. But, it's when you kind of combine a few different tools, I think I'd have to see what our exact chain is, but we figured out how to retain, the width and still have it collapse and sound fantastic. And if you can, whenever you're looking at an audio effect rack, you can quickly open it up and see what's going on. And that's literally probably the only thing I've ever seen in Ableton, the only chain I've ever seen where I can't wrap my mind around what's happening. Like if you look at what he's doing, it's so many EQs and all kind, there's so much. It looks so crazy. It looks like you're looking at like a NASA, control room. I don't know how he figured it out, but it works. And then so that's complicated. And then I actually started using, I think it's Ozone's vocal doubler the other day, and I was like, this collapses too. So
that's cool. That's cool. Well, hey, let's take a break from them, and we'll come back in and for the jam session, Rockstars. Before we go, remember that I got links to stuff we're talking about in the show notes, including a YouTube playlist of Spencer's music. So you can just click right through and go check it out right now. Listen to these awesome EDM mixes and pop mixes. And we'll see you all in just a minute for the jam session. This show is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you are ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly exactly how I mastered my own record, Skadoosh, using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. These techniques would work for you in whichever DAW you are using right now. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads to mix in your own studio and even include in your mixing portfolio if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now and look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Are you using a Mac in your recording studio? Are you tired of feeling like the studio setup you worked so hard to create is becoming obsolete too quickly? Wouldn't it feel great to have a trusted friend to help you keep your existing Mac and studio setup current and relevant so that you can focus on the thing you love most, which is making great music? Well, now you can rely on OWC, Other World Computing, which you can find at OWC.com, whose mission it is to help you get the most mileage out of your existing Mac. Whether you need to upgrade your RAM, install an SSD drive, add more connectivity, or simply find a great used Mac that's ready to rock, OWC will help take your studio into the future with a vast library of DIY install videos, 24/7 friendly support, and free shipping in the US on most items over $49. Why get frustrated and ditch your existing computer when you can take your studio into the future with OWC? Learn more at OWC.com and find out how awesome your Mac can be at OWC. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Spencer Bastian, joining us from Los Angeles. We're talking about making EDM tracks, pop mixes. And Spencer, are you ready to jam?
Indeed. Let's jam.
Cool, dude. So we were talking about the monitors you're using to mix and getting the low end right. You've got big monitors with the sub. You've got the smalls. You've got you're a way to get it over to your iPhone. When you listen to all these things, when do you know that you feel like you've got the bass right? And is getting the bass right is it really getting the best bass, or does it sometimes ever feel like just getting a compromise for the particular song we're working on, and at the end of the day, we just like hope that this particular song has great bass?
That's a great question, and I think it's a little bit of both, just depending on the project. So for something like Jealous Girl, for example, the bass music stuff we're doing, obviously it needs to be perfect, and that I think it's a combination of low passing my mix and referencing with other songs that are in similar style, and doing those two things simultaneously has been pretty game changing for me. So because sometimes I just can't tell, even as long as I've been in this room and as much sub and bass design that we've done in there, it's still like I'll be like, okay, it's feeling pretty good, and then I'll throw on a reference and low pass the reference and my mix using, I'll tell you about the plugin in a second, but
sure.
Pretty quickly I'll be like, oh wow, I'm like, the bass is way too hot, or wow, it's not even close to as intense as it needs to be, relative to the reference. So that technique, I've been kind of doing that for a while, but there's a plugin by Melda called M Compare, and there's a few other. I think there's one called like Magic AB people use, and reference by Mastering the Mix. But M Compare is the first one I got, and I love it. So you can load in references. You can also have it reference like pre and post mastering chain, and it's a pretty powerful plugin. It's cheap. $50 or something, but I have it a hotkey, so anytime I press like D on my keyboard, it switches to the reference. So cool. I can put a low pass within M Compare on the entire master chain and just switch back and forth between the reference. So it's really easy to see if I'm in the ballpark where I need to be. And I probably wouldn't need to do that as much if I was in like a perfectly, tuned room and everything, but this is it's a good hack for what we're making the most of, the room we're in and dealing with what we have.
I think we I think we just have to do it. I think we're focused on the music. We're focused on other things. We just have to keep checking back with the low end of our mix,
Yeah.
And it's easy to like grow used to whatever you're listening to. And that's the real curse to getting your mix right, is it's so easy to just get used to what you're hearing.
Exactly. And it's helped me distinguish too, like what I want the low end to be coming from, as in the subs. Like, I think personally, like these days, I kind of make a decision, like, is it going to be the kick or is it going to be the bass? Because unless I want like hardcore side chaining going on, like I kind of pick between the two. And that's just in studying a lot of bass music too. It seems to be just like, a song's either one or the other. It's either like, sustained subs or just like a really punchy sub coming from the kick. So
the question I want to ask is, if you wouldn't mind explaining a little further what this whole, high cut is. Just explain it to a 5-year-old, to a beginner, what it means and what you're listening for.
Well, the first thing I'm listening for, so I'll low pass, in other words, cut all the highs off of the mix, just using a low pass filter at the end of my master bus, just to see what's going on down there, first of all. Because when you're just like, especially like I mentioned earlier, throwing a bunch of stuff randomly and just trying to work really fast in the composition and production stage, like the low end can quickly become kind of a mess. And I've gotten a lot better about that, like throwing a loop on and making sure I just cut the low end out of it if I know, just that the sub is already there or something. But basically, no matter what, I listen through the entire track while only the low end.
So what do you, if you were to imitate what that sound is, does it sound like the song we've been listening to all day, or does it sound like something different?
The thing is, like, it's pretty obvious, like what to do once you cut the highs, because it should just be like, especially when you really go all the way down, you should really only hear, at least with the kind of stuff I'm making right now, like you should only hear, the kick and the bass, and there shouldn't be rumble in there from other sources, from, things I've been recording in the room, like, the guitar mic or the vocal mic or a loop. A lot of loops still have even like a hi-hat loop will have like literally sub frequencies in there, depending on where you got it from. So, pretty quickly you can start to hear where it just sounds messy. Like it should sound really clean for the, at least for the bass music stuff. Most electronic music, it should sound like super clean down there. So doing that, cutting the highs and listening back is a great way to just start cleaning up your low end. And that's just a good way to start figuring out how to even have a good low end. But you
also made a good point of referencing another record, because at first when you do this, you're going to be like, I don't know, it sounds like a weird filtered whoop, 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 whoop thing. How do I know if that's right or wrong,
That is indeed the starting point. And there's a couple times where I've, put on a reference of one of my favorite songs, and sure enough, their low end wasn't really right either. But for the most part, the heavy hitters, their low end's just clean.
Who are some of those heavy hitters for you?
For me, one of the most commonly referenced songs, again, only when I'm working in this specific, genre, I guess, is Skrillex's remix of Humble. Like, that's just, amongst a lot of my friends out here, even the guys who are only really focused on pop, that song still is pretty heavily referenced, because the mix is just, it's one of those mixes where I just don't know how it sounds the way it does. Like, it's just, something's going on in there that just, it's so punchy but balanced, and there's a lot of clarity, and it's a great reference for the entire
let me also drop this in, if you don't mind. Rockstars, if you're listening to this, if you're listening to it on the website, you can do this, but particularly if you're listening on YouTube right now, drop a comment in below And after you subscribe and like and hit the notification bell, drop a comment in below and let us know what some reference mixes are for you, like which ones for you equal the spot on low end. Sorry about that, Spencer. The floor is yours again. Go ahead.
I would love to hear what other people are using too, because again, it's so genre specific. So like that one wouldn't be my go-to for, you know, doing a pop record or like similar stuff to what I've done with Jonathan either. But basically, yeah, for getting low end right, I referenced that and Quicks. He's another bass music guy right now that's blowing up. Quicks, just Quix, and also G Jones. Quicks and G Jones, those guys like just have crazy sound design abilities, and their low end is
awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely like the pinnacle of sick.
And do you ever feel like they're using the same tools that you're using, and so you should be able to do it?
I have no idea. I think so. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've even, you know, watched videos of these guys, and not so much G Jones. I don't really. He's like, you know, from another planet. But Quick's release, he's very public in how he does things, and it's one of those discouraging things where you're like, oh man, he's probably using this expensive thing or whatever I don't have. And then you see a session on YouTube and it's Ableton with like stock plugins. And I'm like, man. So he's a great reference.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And he's listening. His speakers are cereal boxes.
Exactly. Or, you know, I had heard Skrillex mix his first album just on his laptop speakers. Like, really? I mean,
come on. Maybe that's how he got it so loud. Okay,
Exactly.
cool. So you sort of check with the low filter. You see what the low end sounds like on these reference mixes, and then you just flip over to yours. And if it seems like you're in the ballpark, it helps with your confidence that you're doing the right thing, or it helps you get, you know, just sort of fine tune your perspective, focus in your perspective on what you think you might want to do with your own mix.
Exactly. And then I just keep playing it back and going back and forth between mine and the reference, and while opening the filter, and
so letting in more and more upper mids and mid range and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you ever do sort of a bandpass filter just strictly in the mids to compare, or do you feel like that's something that our ear is capable of doing?
I used to do that more, but I started finding that it can be really helpful actually. Again, in carving out mud, I seem to always let, you know, between 200 hertz and 800 kind of stack up for some reason. So it is helpful, but I did notice that when I was over referencing in the mids and just over referencing in general can really start to confuse your ear and start to make you think you suck. Mm-hmm. And like it does reach a point of diminishing returns in my opinion, but I think using it sparingly, especially in the low end, is extremely helpful. And the high end too. Yeah. Like I do this exact reverse where I high pass everything and starting at the very top, and quickly we'll see like, oh wow, my top end's not nearly as compressed as I think it should be.
Interesting.
Things like that.
And it's like the grass is greener thing. It's like, okay, it's cool to look over and, you know, get inspired by your neighbor's lawn, but if you're not, it's what you said, think less, do more. If you're not working on your own lawn, your grass ain't never getting green, you know? So it's like,
exactly.
Just do what you can with your mix. And it's no fun to be discouraged when you're trying to create, when you're trying to mix, because the biggest thing you have, I think, to bring to the table is confidence. And
that's a great point. That should be a big takeaway just in general in this discussion is exactly that. Keeping it light and fun, and not, once you start beating yourself up, it's not always constructive to sit and say like, oh, Quix's mix sounds so much better than mine, and like that's just, it becomes counterproductive.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the music that we make and the mix that we do is a reflection of our mood, you know, in a way too. And it's like, if your mood is down the whole time, how the hell are you going to expect to make something that's super fun to listen to?
Yeah, you can hear that in music. And I think that sometimes the more time you spend on the mix, it's not necessarily making it quote unquote better.
Yeah.
So it's just different and starts to sound frustrated just like you are while you're trying to get it right. So,
all right, cool. So now let's go to the second part of the question I wanted to ask before, which is you mentioned sidechain pumping and effects and stuff like that. Let's just get into that topic. What is sidechain compression? How did you explain that to the rock stars?
well, I mean, it's when the dynamic range of one sound ducks or is lowered momentarily based on another source feeding into it. So the most common is, whenever when the bass is playing and it ducks whenever the kick hits. That's pretty much that's a pretty basic explanation of it. And it's super exaggerated in genres like house and where it's just the side chain pumping sound, 4 on the floor, quarter note pulse. But yeah, I use it. It's built into my Ableton template in a way that I have it to where I can side chain the entire groups. So I have everything grouped like kick snare, and then all the rest of the drums are they're in their own group. All the synths are in their own group, or melodic instruments rather. All the basses, all the effects. So there's all these different groups that contain a multitude of tracks, and the groups themselves have sidechain plugins on them. You can use built-in plugins from any DAW to do sidechaining. I use right now I'm using one from Cable Guys called Volume Shaper.
That's a favorite one. Matthew Weiss recommended that on the podcast way back in the beginning of the show. And I got it. I was frustrated that it doesn't exist for AAX, so I can't use it in my Pro Tools.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, I think it's only audio units, but it's super cool. Tell us about it, though.
So, I mean, you can have it ducking your audio at any interval, and you can really customize the shape of the envelope. And use Volume Shaper's internal LFO to just do basic side chaining and get cool rhythmic patterns and find happy accidents. But that's really not the way I use it. I use it just kind of as a traditional side chain, waiting for a side chain input from another source. And for me specifically, I have at the very top of my template a kick and snare sidechain, just MIDI. It's just sending MIDI to my different instances of Volume Shaper. So it's a little bit, it requires a little more work. So if I change a kick pattern in my song, I have to go up above it and change the kick pattern MIDI for the sidechain. I don't know if
the MIDI is controlling the sidechain.
Yeah, I'm not actually using the actual audio from the kick itself. There's a MIDI channel above it, or a MIDI track above it rather, that follows it's supposed to mirror the kick pattern. So but if if you're conscious of it as you go, and a lot of my drums are MIDI anyway, so I can just copy and paste the MIDI from the kick track up to the sidechain track. Then everything's just sidechaining pretty effortlessly.
Cool.
And you can do multi-band sidechain too, and you can get really, really wacky with it, where only the bass, only the below 200 hertz will dip in the bass track when the kick hits, versus dipping the whole thing. Sometimes I do that. Sometimes I want an exaggerated full frequency spectrum sidechain.
And this is all with Volume Shaper?
Right now, I'm trying Volume Shaper. I'm still even not 100% on it. I was using the built-in Ableton compressor, specifically version 8 seems to sound the best for some reason.
Interesting. Something else I remember noticing about Ableton Live is that the stereo mix itself, the stereo bus, could really accept it being slammed and sounded great. I remember that years ago, probably Ableton 7 or something, or 6. Is that something that you're aware of now? Is that sort of a known thing that if you pushed Pro Tools, it might not sound great if you've overloaded on the output, but if you do that with Ableton, it's all groovy?
That's a good question. I fully agree that it does sound great, pushing it into the red, and that's kind of another on my mix checklist is making sure that the drums are like the drum bus, for example, have the drum kit hitting at like, +1 or plus up to 3 dB. So it's clearly in the red, and then once and then building the mix around that. It's basically throwing gain staging out the window in a way. And then when I throw my master chain on there, it's just like slams. I haven't really tried that in Pro Tools yet, but it does indeed sound good. You're doing that in Ableton, pushing it hard. Because I found when I'm conscious of keeping things out of the red, let's say you turned your limiter off in Ableton and to see how much headroom you have in your mix. I was really conscious of that for a while, and it's a good. I think it can be a good rule to follow, especially if you're not fully done with your production and you want to add more instruments. It's just headroom's amazing, but for some reason my mixes just didn't have the impact. They weren't slamming as hard when I was leaving more headroom and making up for the gain later. Something about hitting Ableton's master bus really hard. I don't know. You're right. It does have a sound.
Do you, in your production process, does it go from you to a mastering engineer? Is that part of a common process, or are you often sort of mastering it in-house as part of your production?
I try to go to a mastering engineer whenever, time and budget allows. And mastering is pretty cheap too. So there's a couple guys I use, but lately I've been, Misha and I, who have the project Jealous Girl that I mentioned, like we've done our own mastering for the last 2 or 3 songs, and we're liking the results, but it does take more time. And I think it's important to involve other ears in the process. So I don't really recommend like writing, producing, mixing, mastering everything on your own, but we've tried it out and we like the results other than how long it takes. For the pop stuff, any label cut that I do, I don't even mix it. I just send the stems or Pro Tools session off to the mixer and they mix, and then it's mastered by somebody else.
Do you find that you still have more room to push the track at the mastering stage? And when do you run into things where you're like, oh man, we totally squashed it too much? Where's the balancing act happen in a process like that?
Even if we are self-mastering or sending to another mastering engineer, we still take off the final stages of our master chain. So it's like we're allowing for, in other words, what I mean is if we're self-mastering, we don't master within the Ableton session. Like we've been taking the limiter off and maybe a couple other things, but still leaving some basic compression on the master bus, and then we export a wave and pull that into Misha's been actually doing it in Reaper.
Wow.
Lately. But so this it just depends on the song and the project and whether or not we're mastering it. But either way, like no matter what, we're not gonna leave it squash before the mastering process. That's just more as a test we do, like while we're finishing the song to see how it will sound.
What's a good way for the rock stars to think about it? I imagine that you've got your mix bus, you've got your mix compression. And then after that, you might have some plugins that you use to did I cut out?
No, not at all. I was just laughing because it's funny. Like I feel like there's like the master bus, like a little bit of compression and some EQ shaping, maybe some stereo widening and whatnot. And then after that, we like kind of go ham with these. Right now I'm using this mastering suite by Eventide. They have a company underneath them or something under their umbrella called Newfangled, and the Newfangled Elevate suite, you can it's so sick, man, because you can control the transients per frequency band, and they have up to 26 bands. So you can like just add so much extra punch and get it just so loud at the very final stage. It's the cleanest limiter I've ever used, where I can push it like our songs are clocking in at like, -4 RMS or something like absolutely absurd. So, I mean, that's too much probably, but it still doesn't sound, if you push any other limiter and try to get that result any other limiter that I've used, like it just sounds like mush.
Well, I mean, there's a dialogue that goes on even on this podcast. Some of my guests are talking about, the loudness wars and all that.
Yeah, I mean,
but I mean, in the end, you're just trying to make music that seems to hit the mood right. And if what you're producing needs to be, sounds better to you when you're just pushing the crap out of it, then push the crap out of it.
That's a whole other topic too. You're right. Because it's not like I think that's always a good thing. It's more just like bragging rights that I could do that if I wanted to using this plugin. but actually we're using a clipper at the final stage too. It's a free plugin called Free Clip. I don't know if they have the AAX version.
That's the ship with the 4 masts on it and a whole bunch of sails and everything from the 1700s.
I don't know.
No, I'm just kidding.
Because I was like, actually, that would be sweet if they put that in there.
That would be pretty cool. Yeah, I'm giving away my Boston roots. The great clipper ships pulling into the harbor.
Exactly. Your history.
Cool, man. Let me back up in the process for you and go right to the beginning. How can we find the right kick drum for a production? And what do we do with it from the point of actually finding that first sound through the mix to the master? How do we make sure that, I feel like the kick drum is pretty important, right?
It is. And that's something that goes back to, the frustrations in the mix process. Something that Misha and I have been learning lately is sometimes when the mix isn't right because of something like the kick drums is not sitting right, and we'll spend days tweaking it and not getting it's still not quite sounding right. Sometimes it's just a matter of swapping out the sample itself. It's something that's that simple. So finding that from the get-go, I think that probably happens more often than not, but sometimes, yeah, you should always be aware of that. Just tones in general, all across the board. Like if something's just frustrating you and it's not sitting right in the mix, you might just need to swap it out or re-record the guitar or whatever it is. It might not be just like a matter of EQing it right. But
talk about the sources for that kick drum. I know that some of us are like, oh, we've got this folder of samples and we just flip through until we find one we like. Is it like that? Or is it more like, is it smarter to have a tool that lets you sculpt the sound to begin with?
I'd say it's always it's a matter of layering. And some of those tools that you mentioned do that. Like there's one called Kick 2 by Sonic Academy where you can really dial in like the snap but it's all synthesized. You can pull in samples too, but something about seeing it in front of me, seeing the layers on the timeline helps me. So I might take the snap from one source, like the very beginning transient. It might not even be from a kick drum again. Like it's just layering different sounds, getting the snap right, the low end right, and kind of like the tail, like the overall just like body of the tone of the kick. And like a song I just did the other day had like 6 layers and it looks all confusing because there's like plugins on all those layers doing various things, but really in the end it just sounds like a meaty, very punchy kick drum. So.
And do you ever feel like the smart move would be to just bounce those down to 1? Or do you feel the way up till the end, you're like, I'm glad we hit all 6 still?
I always do bounce it down to 1 and save that. So I try to recycle as much as possible, but it's just this like addiction, really, the thrill of like trying to make a new sound that can sometimes be a waste of time, especially if you're trying to like compose something or produce something quickly. But but yeah, we do like I always bounce that down and then save it for later use. So you never know. And and as far as sources for all these layers, I mean that's really just anything, all the same packs everybody's using, or from that to like using like synths and sine waves, for example, and actually tuning your kicks. I mean, it all depends on what you're going for, like that, like I mentioned a minute ago about deciding whether like what's going to carry the sub weight of your song. Is it going to be the kick or the bass? And if it's not the kick, for example, and you want a really sub heavy song that would like sustain sub notes, then the kick doesn't necessarily need to be tuned with a sine wave, and doesn't need to be necessarily even layered as much. You might find like a couple samples that stack on top of each other and take the low end from one, the high end from another, whatever. It's a lot of sculpting to find it right, but it can be easy or complex depending on what the kick's purpose is.
Okay, cool. Earlier on, we were mentioning Skrillex and the genre of dubstep. Tell us what dubstep is, and what do we need to know about creating dubstep tracks?
I mean, I wouldn't say I'm an expert on dubstep, first of all. I think dubstep was kind of the genre that got me into creating heavier electronic music, but now I don't really know if for better or for worse, if the stuff I'm doing would even fit into a genre. But so dubstep, I mean, to me is I guess I would say it's the 140 BPM with like LFO basses, the wobbling and stuff. But I don't even know if that's still, people still making that? Like,
I don't know. I mean, I listen to it a lot. I mean, I Kill the Noise, for example, is one of my favorite sounding artists. Let's just say that they make my car stereo and subwoofer in the car sound like I've got a really good car stereo with a really good subwoofer. But also I wanted to point out, you mentioned 140 BPM, and Rockstars, the other way to think about it is half that, 70, because that's really kind of like the halftime feel of dubstep. But like, I get you, it's a wobble bass, like you said, but also like the kick and the snare, they're kind of spitty a lot of times, right? They're not huge and they're not sustaining, right?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes the snare is, because it's sometimes layered with white noise, rings out a little bit, but and it almost sounds, like a typical kind of just rock drum kit snare could be a helpful layer in there, an acoustic snare, but the kicks, are usually pretty tight and more snappy, and that's, sometimes some dubstep songs I've heard where the kick has a lot of sub in it, and sometimes there's sub basses, and then the kick is really like minimal information below 100 hertz. So,
well, that's cool. I mean, we're when we describe the basics on this show, it's okay for us to just describe the most generic version of something too.
Exactly. And it's funny too, because how we met was through Jonathan, and like the stuff that Jonathan and I were doing was like completely unrelated to
True.
Too. So it's funny. And then I have that psychedelic band too. So I'm kind of almost like, okay, dubstep. Yeah, that's right. But I'm still, Jealous Girl is doing builds and drops. So I guess it's still stemmed from the original dubstep stuff I was listening to 6 years ago.
Yeah, well, that's cool. We don't have to stay stuck on dubstep at all.
No, it's just funny. I haven't thought about it in a while.
Talk about your work with Jonathan.
Jonathan and I met him through my management, and because he was with Prescription, I think he still is, but he's one of my favorite artists. First of all, he's the nicest guy I've ever met, pretty much. So I don't know if
he's
you
super nice
that, but just immediately when we started working, back then my studio setup was out of my apartment and in Echo Park. And it was just like, those were like the most liberating sessions I think I had done up to that point, where it was no stress, no like, oh, we need to make this song for my project. We need to do this to pitch to, it was just like, let's just dink around and have fun and see what happens. And if you actually open up the original Ableton sessions, like the very first, like the day of session, and you can see the progression of that mindset where like you can hear us like recording, like Jonathan's sitting against my wall playing guitar through a whammy pedal, and I'm like controlling the whammy while he's just kind of noodling, and then we're like, you can see us like pick one thing, like, oh, let's throw that on a sampler, and then we throw that like a loop on Ableton sampler, and then make a whole new loop out of sampling the whammy guitar. And then Jonathan starts playing a riff on guitar over the thing that we sampled, and just like snowballed into like I don't know, these really interesting songs. So we did.
Now, how is it that you can see the progression? Is it because you use Ableton as a DAW like Pro Tools, so it's just from left to right? The song just kind of gets layered? Because,
well, not... It's a good question. Basically, it's because on any DAW, you have your starting and end point of the song. But then for me, and probably a lot of people, like either way at the beginning of the session or way at the very end of the timeline is just like a bunch of, recordings of different things. Like you can see like, it's almost like a jam session segment of the session that's unrelated to the song, where there's all these random audio files, and then like I said, sampling it, and you can see like, us recording little, Teenage Engineering. I have a couple of those pocket operators.
Oh yeah.
Like messing with those and running those into the whammy pedal. So you can just see all these random audio files scattered throughout, and it kind of progresses from left to right up and to an actual start point of the song, which then got completely changed because we would like go on one direction, and then we'd get to the pre-chorus or something and be like, okay, the pre-chorus should actually be the verse, and let's just start from scratch, like using this as the basis. So then we'd start a whole nother song all in one session. So it's a complete mess. But yeah, then you finally see the shaping of what became like, the two records that we've put out so far, Best Love and Just for Show. So
that's cool. I think I use Pro Tools in a similar way where, I'm working on the song from left to right, but then after the end of the song, those miles of endless open track, of the multi-tracks, I just use those as like, I'll go record a little thing and then copy it and then bring it back over to the song. And it's like this big blank slate work area.
Exactly.
After the song on the right.
I mean, maybe everyone does that, but it does feel good to always have that, right? Like,
it just feels like the natural place to go do something, and I appreciate it. I haven't used it, but I appreciate how Presona Studio One built that into their DAW, where they have something called a scratch pad, where it's like a second session that you can just go over to and do anything you want to.
It's brilliant.
Yeah, you just kind of zip from the right. You just kind of open up the drawer, work on that part of it, copy it, and then bring it back over to the left and drop it into your session.
No way. That every DAW should have that. I still wonder why there's not like the one go-to. Why can't Ableton have playlists, and why doesn't Pro Tools have a scratch pad? Like, why?
Oh man, how about like a skin, like a master, an open source master skin that just skins together all the DAWs that exist, and you just work in that one.
Yes.
It's getting crazy now, man.
That gets me excited.
All right, cool. Let's see, what else do I want to ask you about? I noticed on your Instagram feed, you had some really cool clips in there, which a couple of thoughts about that. One is Instagram makes everything sound a whole lot louder and explosive, which is kind of cool. And then you were giving shout outs to @BookBeats and @WeSoJealous. And I wondered if you want to give a shout out to those guys, and what's that all about? Are those people you work with? What are you guys doing?
Yeah, that is the Jealous Girl project I mentioned. And so BookBeats is the broken back beats you mentioned earlier. That's the guy I share the studio with. So shout out to BookBeats. His name's Misha Chilak from Toronto. And we share a studio together. I take it at nights. He has it during the day, and then we do a lot of sessions together. And our project right now is, we do a bunch of random stuff, co-writes and trailers and all kinds of different mixes together. But one of our passion projects is Jealous Girl, which is super heavy That's the We So Jealous handle, just heavy bass music.
That's awesome. Now,
outlet.
Also, as I'm hearing you say it out loud, Brokeback Beats might get misinterpreted if you run with that. So you might want to just consider whether that's the right branding or not. It's fine either way. All right, cool. So now let's talk also about performing as a band, because I know that's an important thing for you. You're really taking this electronic music and putting it together in a way that it can be performed as a band. Tell us, is that the Jealous Girl project? And tell us about that process for you and why that's important.
Jealous Girl isn't that far along yet. So right now we're just releasing songs and kind of slowly building a team. We do definitely want to take it live and have live performance on stage with musicians. But that's a little bit of a ways off. We're still getting the visual side down first in building the brand right now. But more importantly, the music. Just we're going to put out a track like every few weeks and just keep building that organically. But as far as my experience with electronic live hybrid music, it would be Citizun. And at first Citizun started, we'd put out a song or an EP, and then it was just in the box, we're producing, and then we'd figure out how to play it live. And it was painstaking process of putting samples on SPD, SX, and putting triggers on a live drum kit, and it worked, but it took so long. It was almost like we'd finish a song and then spend as much time just preparing it to play live. And with the latest album we're in the middle of right now, we're actually tracking everything live as a live band. And so basically what you hear is, on the record is basically exactly what you'll hear live, and it's all played live and performed live. So it's not like a lot of smoke and mirrors or backing tracks this time.
Yeah.
So,
and I'll see you guys at Bonnaroo.
I hope so, man. I mean, like I said, now it's this like psychedelic LSD inspired, this sludge rock.
Yeah, I'm sorry, man. That's not a good fit for Bonnaroo.
Well,
none of those things ever happen at a giant music festival.
But it's sludgy and it's not gimmicky. You know what I mean? It's like we're doing have you heard the band Sleep?
No, not yet.
Total stoner metal. So we're taking aesthetics from Sleep and old Soundgarden. Soundgarden's my favorite band ever. And Louder Than Love and Ultra Mega OK. Taking aesthetics from that and combining it with Grateful Dead, and then and then combining that with there's some definitely vocal sampling and a lot of cool Ableton stuff. My live rig will be just push 2 with a running Ableton and then a guitar and a bunch of pedals and stuff. So
cool. And
everything's MIDI synced together, so it's just a lot more organic now.
Will you have a drum set going as well?
It's a live kit, but with triggers on the kit and also a bunch of V-drum pads kind of scattered around the kit. So what my brother's a drummer, and one thing we've been practicing lately is he's playing a beat. So think almost like Com Trues. We have a couple songs that are kind of that mid-tempo but still 4 on the floor, retro sounding drums. So he'll be playing that on the V-drums, and then he can loop that using the Ableton's looper, and then over on top of, so now that's looping while we're all still playing, and then he jumps over to the acoustic kit and can do jungle beats and other accents over that, and then the loop will turn off. And
all right, I got to back you up for a sec. How do you use the looper thing with that first thing so that it's performed and then looped and you're good to go? Because I'm picturing his hands and his feet are tied up doing the kick pedal and the hi-hat and the snare or whatever.
So basically the way we have it set up is we will be, at least on something like this, we'll be playing to a click. So on the Ableton timeline. So there's no backing tracks, but it's still there's a master clock running from Ableton, and my brother can hit we have one auxiliary pad. It's not even really a pad. It's just this little like MIDI trigger thing that you hit it with the drumstick from Roland. And that thing you can
Wait, the drumstick has to be from Roland?
These are like crazy. Yeah, we're sponsored by Roland, so we can only use the drumsticks too. Yeah, we are actually sponsored by Roland. They hooked us up with this this pad, this little. I mean, you can use it for whatever. It just sends a MIDI signal. So that thing, if you hit that, let's say we know that the next measure is where the looping needs to start. My brother Griffin can just hit that pad at any point up to that measure, like within one measure prior, up to the measure starting where the loop starts. He can hit that pad and it'll tell Ableton Looper, okay, starting at the next measure is where the beginning of the loop.
Now this is using the session view, right? Or not session view.
This is using the arrangement, like the Pro Tools looking one.
Really? Okay. Because I think of the clips as functioning that way too, where you
actually, as you're saying that, I'm like, it'd probably be way easier to do it in the other view. So I should probably once and for all just learn how to do that, man.
But that's cool. All right. So it's like it knows that you're about to loop, so you just got to play well, and then the beat comes around, and now it's grabbed your loop, and you're listening to it back.
Yeah.
What do you do if you screw up and you're like, "Oops, that loop sucked"? Is it still easy to sort of redo that?
It is actually, again, just using that one pad, you can kind of have it turn on and off looper. But yeah, as far as if there's a mistake, we haven't really fully worked that out yet. And like, my brother's pretty good and he plays in time and stuff. But like, I think what would be ideal for that is my brother's really good, by the way. Shout out to my brother.
Nice.
But it's to get it. I think the next thing I'm looking into is how to like MPC style almost auto quantize what he just recorded as the loop. I think Ableton Looper you can get it to sort of do that, but we haven't fully mastered that yet. So It's kind of the pressure's just on him to, like old what was that dude, like was it Howie Day or what was the guitar player that like looped just like crazy live? He was a solo.
Oh, I don't remember. I don't know. I mean, I see so many people. I just saw a girl who performed at the local club here down the street, and she had a vocal looper, and she would start every song like that. Like I think it was like KT Tunstall who had a big single, a decade ago, based on loops, but start out with some claps and a beatbox and a few vocals, and then turn to the mic and sing and play. And I love the whole looping thing on stage being done in cool new ways,
I do too. And, it's at least if it's, I don't think we don't want it to be like the backbone of what we're doing, but it's just one little thing that's, would happen a couple times in the set. That's like, wow, how'd they do that? And it is all done live. And if you do it enough, I think you just hopefully you don't fuck it up.
Well, you got to be on the spot. And also I think the advice for Lidge is, think less, do more.
Exactly. And just, and keep it fun and see what happens.
Cool. Well, I guess we got to wrap up here, but let me ask you one more question before we do. And I guess we talked about guitars early on because we talked about direct guitars and amps. But I wondered if you wanted to say this, like, because one of the tracks you did with Jonathan Gersitano had this great distortion and crunchy thing happening. And I wondered if you wanted to comment again on like some of your favorite ways to add crunch and distortion to a track.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I use, well, first of all, it's like, okay, what kind of track is it? And for something like that, we were using it, I think it was only on, like, it would only happen, like, it would be fairly clean, and then, like, out of nowhere would be these, like, big, super distorted hits with a distorted vocal, and then for just, like, a couple seconds, and then go back to, so, I mean, I feel like that was all probably just, again, like, us messing around, and like, well, maybe it could have been a happy accident or whatever, but once we decided, I mean, I don't know. I don't really know how we approached that specifically, and but I could tell you, like, so my go-to, at least plugins and stuff. I mean, I think probably the main one is Trash 2 by Isotope. That we used with Jonathan a lot.
I haven't tried that one yet, but I've been very curious about it.
I think what I like the most about that one is it has a convolution built in, so you can even load your own IRs, your impulse responses into it. So you can just get really quickly like transform the sound. Even if you don't use any of the distortion or clipping, saturation or anything, you only use it as a convolution plugin. It's fantastic. But yeah, that one, and you can also get like really terrible sounding, like harsh distortion really quickly too. So you kind of got to know what you're doing with it. It took me a while to get.
Well, I already know how to get bad sounding distortion. I do it all the time.
yeah, exactly. So anyway, that Decapitator, Devil Lock, I think those are we used with Jonathan most.
Yeah, Devil Lock is and level Devil Lock is the Sound Toys, right?
Yep.
It's the distortion is great on it. I don't think I'm using it enough.
Same, because it's really a compressor, and I always thought of it as like a heavy distortion plugin, and so I'm trying to like think of it more as a super dirty compressor again, and that's made me use it more and not crank up the gain necessarily as much, or even just run. I keep it on an aux bus sometimes, and just will run stuff in for that extra little, parallel.
That's what I'm excited to try out. I'm excited to pretend to be Chad Blake and try and figure out how I can make that part of my drum sound.
Man, Misha just went to a little seminar thing with Chad Blake with like a few other people in the room, and he like mixed some Black Keys song on the spot. I'm like, God, I wanted to be there.
Was that at NAMM? Was it mixed with the Masters or something like that?
I think it was, yeah.
Cool, man. Did you make it out to NAMM yourself?
I didn't. No, I didn't, unfortunately.
We could have said hello out there, man. I was wandering the floors.
One of these days, man, we'll make it happen.
One of these days. All right. Well, let me ask you the final wrap-up question here. This one is hypothetical. You're going to go back in time, take the studio Wayback Machine, and find young Spencer strapping on his Vans. I guess there were no straps there. You just slide them on. And you're going to say, listen, Spencer, only go with the checkered Vans, because all the other ones, you just want the checkered Vans. And and not only that, but here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the recording studio yourself one day. What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could?
Oh, man, probably don't panic. If you have an artist in the room and shit's just falling apart and it's high pressure, which has happened to me many times, panicking never helps. So that and really, but even to avoid that stage even happening, I think the biggest advice would be just staying organized and like putting a little bit in every day to just like making sure how to find solutions quickly. So whether it's something simple like a power cable for a pedal, because if you're searching for that, like completely ruins the creative vibe.
Yeah.
Something like that, to just like knowing how your samples are organized or what your go-to plugins are or a go-to guitar chain, just having everything ready to go as much as you can, I think is common sense advice really, but it's just when you're having fun, and getting into recording and you don't, I don't know, I never really thought in those terms. I was just always kind of like every day is different. And now everything, I'm just like being organized has been game changing. Templates and just knowing where your sounds are.
Well, that's great advice, man. And I try to do that in the studio. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it's really challenging. And man, does it piss you off when that thing that should have been over here isn't over there. And you're like, where is it?
Exactly. Or when an artist is like, yeah, it'd be really cool if we had like some, clean sound, more acoustic drums here. And you're not just like, oh, okay, yeah, hold on. Yeah. And just like spending an hour finding that and just knowing, okay, acoustic drums, sweet. I'm going to use whatever, Slate drums or Addictive drums or I've got whatever, or these samples from that sound or whatever you're sourcing from. So
so cool. That sound. I need to connect with those guys. Paul Mayfield is one of the drummers I know plays on that stuff a lot. And I see his Instagram feeds, and it's just so cool looking and sounding.
They're doing some really great, impressive work.
Oh, excuse me, not Paul Mayberry. I think that's it. I'm saying
okay.
Wrong. Apologies, Paul. Cool, man. Well, Spencer, what a pleasure it's been hanging out with you. I know we struggled with some Skype things. So again, Rockstars, thank you so much for your patience on the sound if we have anything there. But just really fun to talk to you about all this production stuff. And I know I backed you into an EDM bass mech and dubstep corner, but loved it, man.
Yeah, me too, man. Had a blast. Thanks a lot. Hopefully it didn't get too boring and dorky, but thanks for having me. And I rarely get this outlet to dork out on stuff. So thanks, man.
That's what we're here for at Recording Studio Rockstars, man. It's our turn to just geek out and not have any significant others going like, do we really have to talk about that again
exactly.
right now?
There, man.
Spencer, how can the Rockstars find you online, learn more about you and your music, and follow you?
Instagram and Twitter, probably most common, and that's just Spencer Bastian, Bastian. Just no dot, no space, Spencer Bastian.
Okay, cool, awesome. And then I guess that's it, man. Thanks so much for being here with us on the podcast. Rockstars, you'll find links to the stuff we're talking about again in the show notes. Click through, and there's a YouTube playlist there, and you can just go listen to any of these great records that Spencer's making. And then if you're watching this on YouTube now, make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss any more podcasts or videos from us at Recording Studio Rockstars. And drop in a comment in the comment section below and let us know what you enjoyed about this podcast, or if you got any questions for Spencer. Spencer, do you have any questions for the Rockstars?
I mean, what's your inspiration? What's getting everybody excited right now? Like as far as a new and brewing genre or new plugins.
Okay, cool, great question. Yeah, drop in a comment, Rockstars. Spencer, thanks for being here with us, and I look forward to meeting you in person and seeing you around the studio.
Likewise, see you, man.
All right, dude. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rockstars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. Also, remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with these weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free mixing course at mixmasterbundle.com. Look for the link in the show notes. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio, all totally free. Thanks for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.